The air was heavy with smoke. Broken weapons lay scattered on the battlefield. The smell of burnt metal and dust filled every breath. The human, a lone scavenger moving carefully among the ruins, searched for signs of life. Most of the fight had ended hours ago, but the ground still trembled in the distance from faraway explosions. He didn't expect to find anyone alive here, yet, as he stepped over the remains of a destroyed alien mech, he saw movement under a pile of shattered armor. It was small, quick, like the twitch of a trapped animal. He moved closer, pushing aside a heavy metal plate. There she was, a tiny alien warrior, her silver-blue armor cracked, her helmet gone, revealing sharp amber eyes that glared at him with pure defiance. She was smaller than any warrior he had ever seen, barely reaching his chest in height, yet she carried herself like someone who had survived 100 battles. Blood streaked down the side of her face, but her grip on the short blade in her hand was tight. "Stay back, human," she hissed, her voice trembling but full of warning. He raised his hand slowly, showing he carried no weapon in reach. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly. But she didn't believe him. Her people and his had been enemies for years, and mercy was rare in war. He took a careful step forward. She tried to push herself up, but her legs gave out, and she collapsed again. Her breathing was uneven, her chest plate dented from a powerful strike. It was clear she wouldn't last much longer without help. For a long moment, they stared at each other, predator and prey, yet neither moved to strike. Finally, he knelt down, slowly reaching toward her shoulder. The moment his hand touched her, she froze. Not from fear of an attack, but from something stranger. No one had touched her gently before. Her whole body shook, her eyes wide with shock. "You're hurt," he said quietly, checking the damage to her armor. "Don't touch me like I matter," she whispered, her voice breaking. The words cut deep into him. He had seen broken machines, broken cities, but never a person who spoke as if kindness was foreign. Another distant boom made the ground rumble. He looked around. The battlefield wouldn't stay empty for long. Enemy scavengers, looters, even wild beasts would soon arrive. He had a choice: leave her and save himself, or carry her and risk everything. He didn't think twice, sliding his arms under her. He lifted her off the ground. She was surprisingly light, her small frame tense in his grip, her blade pressed weakly against his chest. But she didn't stab. Instead, she looked at him with suspicion, confusion, and something else he couldn't name. "Why?" she demanded, her voice strained. "Because leaving you here feels wrong," he answered. She turned her face away, refusing to show him the emotion in her eyes. He carried her across the rubble, stepping over shattered walls and burned-out vehicles. The night sky above was lit by faint flashes from far-off fighting. Every sound made her tense in his arms. The crack of a falling beam, the low growl of distant engines, but she didn't ask him to stop. She didn't demand to be put down somewhere behind them. Faint voices began to echo through the smoke. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was urgent. "Search parties." He quickened his pace, knowing they were running out of time. The alien girl's breathing slowed, her head resting against his chest. Though her hand never let go of her weapon, they reached the edge of the battlefield where twisted metal gave way to cracked stone streets. An abandoned supply outpost stood ahead, half collapsed but still offering shelter. He kicked the door open and stepped inside, laying her gently on a dusty cot. For the first time, she didn't push him away. Her eyes were half closed, her strength fading. "Don't think this means I trust you, human," she murmured. He gave a faint smile, adjusting the torn blanket over her. "That's fine," he replied. "I just need you alive." Outside, the voices were getting louder. Closer, he glanced at the doorway, his jaw tightening. The capture that shouldn't have happened was already changing everything. And he knew, if they found her here, neither of them would live to see another sunrise. The air inside the old supply outpost was cold and still. Dust floated in the weak beam of light coming through the broken roof. The human closed the heavy door behind him, lowering the metal bar to go. "Keep it from swinging open, outside." The muffled sound of footsteps and voices faded for a moment, but he knew they were still searching. The tiny alien warrior sat stiffly on the cot, her eyes never leaving him. Her blade was still in her hand, the tip resting against her knee. Even injured, she looked ready to fight if he made the wrong move. He found an old medical kit on a shelf and crouched beside her. "I need to clean the wound on your head," he said calmly. She tilted her chin up slightly but didn't answer. Her eyes narrowed as he took out a small bottle of antiseptic and a strip of cloth. When he reached forward, she flinched. "You're shaking again," he said, noticing her trembling hands. She tightened her grip on the blade. I don't like being touched," she muttered. "I've noticed," he replied, his tone softer than she expected. He worked carefully, cleaning the dried blood from her temple. Her breathing was uneven at first, but slowly she stopped resisting. It wasn't trust, not yet, but she was letting him help. "Your armor is damaged," he said, pointing at the cracked plating across her chest. "I can fix it, but I need to take it off." Her eyes flashed with alarm. "No," she said sharply, "it stays on." He didn't push further. Instead, he handed her a canteen of water. She took it with hesitation, sipping slowly, her eyes still watching his every movement. "Why are you doing this?" she finally asked. "You'd be easier to sell than to save." He gave a small shrug. "I'm not looking for easy." A low rumble shook the walls. They both froze. Through a crack in the roof, he saw faint lights moving in the distance. "Patrol drones. They're sweeping the area," he whispered. Her hand tightened around the blade again. "If they find me, they'll kill you too," she said, her voice almost sounding like a warning. "Then we make sure they don't find." "US," he replied without hesitation. He quickly moved to the far side of the room, pulling down a torn curtain to cover the window. The girl leaned back against the wall, her energy fading. For the first time, she studied him, the rough lines on his face, the dirt and scars, the way his eyes kept scanning the room for threats. He wasn't acting like any human soldier she'd been told about. Hours passed in tense silence. He sat on a crate by the door, his weapon resting across his knees. She thought he would sleep, but his eyes stayed open, watching the shadows. When a distant howl echoed through the empty streets, she flinched. He noticed, but didn't speak. Later, she woke with a start, breathing heavily. Another nightmare. She had them often. In the dim light, she saw him still there, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "You're still awake," she murmured. "Couldn't sleep," he said quietly. "Someone has to keep watch." She stared at him for a long moment before whispering, "No one's ever stayed awake for me before." Before he could answer, both of them froze. Footsteps, this time much closer, the sound of boots crunching on debris outside the door. The human motioned for her to stay silent and crept to the side of the entrance. The door rattled once, twice. He gripped his weapon tightly, ready to strike. After a tense moment, the sound moved away. They stayed frozen for several minutes until they were sure the patrol had passed. Only then did he breathe out slowly. "That was close," he whispered. The alien girl didn't respond, but her eyes followed him closely now, as if she was seeing him differently. "You could still leave," she said quietly. "You could walk out, let them take me, and they'd let you live." He met her gaze. "That's not going to happen." Her lips pressed together, as if she didn't know whether to believe him or not. The wind outside picked up, rattling loose metal. Somewhere in the dark, the hunters were still looking for her. But inside the ruined outpost, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. And for reasons she couldn't explain, she wasn't shaking anymore. The first faint light of dawn crept through the cracks in the roof. The human had stayed awake the entire night. The alien girl had dozed in short, restless bursts, her hand never letting go of the blade. When she opened her eyes, she found him still watching the door. He looked tired, but alert, like someone who had lived too long on battlefields. "Morning," he said quietly, though there was no warmth in it. The world outside was still dangerous. She sat up slowly, her armor creaking with the movement. Every plate was scratched, dented, and scorched from the fight. He noticed how it seemed almost too heavy for her small frame. "Let me see your side," he said, nodding toward where she had been clutching herself all night. "I told you, it's fine," she muttered. "It's not," he replied, his voice firm but calm. She hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "I can't take this armor off," she said finally. "Why not?" he asked, her lips tightened. "Because it's all I have left." He studied her for a moment, then stepped closer. "I need to check for broken ribs, internal bleeding, things your armor can't fix." Her blade twitched in her grip, but she didn't lift it. Slowly she turned, her face away, giving the smallest nod. He worked at the clasps, the old metal stubborn and stiff. When the chest plate finally came free, he froze beneath the armor. She looked different. She was thinner than he expected, almost fragile. Across her side ran deep bruises, purple and green, swelling around an ugly cut. Her breathing hitched when his fingers brushed near the wound. "You've been bleeding inside," he said, frowning. Her eyes darted toward him, sharp and defensive. "I can handle it," she said quickly. He shook his head. "Not alone." He cleaned the cut carefully, wrapping it with strips of clean cloth. Her gaze stayed on him the whole time, studying his hands. "You treat me like I'm worth something," she said suddenly. "You are," he answered without looking up. "No one else thinks so," she muttered, her voice almost breaking. Her words made him pause. She was so young, younger than most warriors he'd fought. "Why were you even in that battle?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. "They sent my unit as bait," she said quietly. Her fingers tightened around the fabric of the cot. "They knew we'd be surrounded. They knew we wouldn't survive, but it kept the enemy away from their real forces." The human didn't speak for a long moment. It explained her distrust, her constant readiness to fight. Her people had thrown her away. She wasn't just a soldier, she was a sacrifice. A low, distant hum suddenly broke the silence. She tensed immediately. He moved to the window, peering through a crack in the pale morning light. Sleek black shapes hovered in the sky. "Search drones. They found our trail," he said, grabbing his pack. She was already fastening her armor back into place, her small hands moving quickly despite the pain. They moved out through the back of the outpost, keeping low between collapsed walls. Every shadow felt dangerous, every sound sharper than it should be. The hum of the drones grew louder, echoing off the ruins. He kept glancing over his shoulder to make sure she was keeping up. Her short stride made her slower, but her movements were precise. She knew how to move quietly, how to blend into broken landscapes. When they reached an old drainage tunnel, he motioned for her to go inside first. The air inside was damp and smelled of rust. It was dark enough to hide them, but also dangerous. Anything could be waiting in the shadows. They moved slowly, water splashing softly under their boots. The hum of the drones faded behind them, replaced by the sound of dripping water. Finally, they reached the far end of the tunnel. He peered out. The way ahead was clear for now. "We'll rest for a moment," he said. She sat on a flat stone, pulling her knees close to her chest. "You could leave me," she said again, almost testing him. "You could walk away and save yourself the trouble." He looked at her for a moment. "I told you before," he said simply. "I'm not leaving you." Something flickered in her eyes, not trust, not yet, but a crack in the wall she'd built. She turned her face away, muttering, "You're strange for a human, and you're small for a warrior," he said with the faintest smile. For the first time she almost smiled back, but it faded quickly. Outside the tunnel, the wind carried the sound of engines again. The hunt wasn't over, and now both of them knew it was only going to get harder from here. The wind outside. The tunnel was dry and sharp, carrying fine dust that stung the eyes. The human stepped out first, scanning the horizon. The landscape ahead stretched far and empty, a wasteland of cracked ground. Jagged rocks, and the faint shimmer of heat. There was nowhere to hide for long. If the search drone spotted them here, there would be no quick escape. The alien girl followed, her short strides quick but measured. Her armor creaked with each movement. The bruises under it still fresh, she didn't complain, though her breathing was heavier than before. The human adjusted his pack and kept her close to his side. Every few steps, he glanced at the sky, searching for the black glint of enemy. Machines. The wasteland was quiet at first, too quiet. Even the usual distant rumble of battle seemed far away. But he knew that kind of silence didn't last. It was the kind of quiet that came before something bad. "Where are we going?" she asked finally. "Farther than they expect," he replied. "Farther than I can walk?" she said, her voice almost mocking. "You'll walk until you can't," he said. "Then I'll carry you." She didn't answer, but her eyes flicked toward him briefly, as if weighing his words. Hours passed under the burning sky. The ground shifted from dry soil to loose stone that crunched under their boots. Once, he spotted movement ahead, a cluster of scavenger lizards, their eyes glinting in the sun. They hissed but scattered at the sound of his boots. The girl watched them go, her gaze unreadable. They stopped once to drink, crouching in the shadow of a large boulder. She drank in short sips, watching him carefully. "You could have left me in that outpost," she said again. "That would have been easier," he admitted. "But easy isn't always right." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Humans don't usually think like that." "Maybe I'm not usual," he said, before she could reply. The faint hum returned. Low, steady, and growing louder. They both froze. He grabbed her arm gently but firmly, pulling her down behind the boulder. A shadow passed overhead. One of the black search drones, its sensors swept the ground in wide arcs, scanning for movement. The human pressed a finger to his lips, signaling silence. The drone paused in the air, its head turning slightly as if sniffing out a scent. The girl's hand went to her blade, but he placed his hand over hers. "Not now," his eyes said, after a long tense moment. The machine drifted away, its hum fading into the distance. They didn't move until it was completely gone. "That was close," he whispered. She nodded, though her grip on the blade was still tight. "They'll send more," she said quietly. "They'll send everything," he replied, "which is why we keep moving." They left the shelter of the boulder and pushed deeper into the wastes. The sun dropped lower, turning the sky into streaks of gold and red. Long shadows stretched over the cracked earth. It was beautiful in a way, but neither of them was thinking about beauty. They were thinking about survival. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped sharply. The wind became colder, carrying the faint howl of something alive in the distance. The girl walked closer to him now, her small frame almost lost in the gloom. "Do you hear that?" she asked. "Yes," he said, scanning the horizon. It wasn't the sound of drones. It was organic, deep and slow. Something was moving out there, and it was big. They reached a shallow ravine and decided to rest for the night. He built a small, hidden fire between rocks, the glow barely visible from above. The girl sat near it, her hands stretched toward the warmth. She watched him as he fixed a makeshift meal from ration packs. "You're too calm," she said. "And you're too quiet," he replied. "I'm watching," she said simply. "What for?" "To see if you're lying about not selling me." He looked at her for a long moment. "I'm not," he said. "You're worth more than they could ever pay." She blinked, clearly caught off guard by the words. For a few seconds she had no answer, but before she could speak, the deep howl came again, closer this time. The human stood, grabbing his weapon. From the darkness beyond the ravine, a huge shadow moved. The girl's eyes widened as the shape stepped into the faint firelight. It was no drone. It was a desert predator, drawn by the scent of food and blood. The human moved in front of her without thinking. "Stay behind me," he said firmly. She gripped her blade. Ready to fight beside him, the creature let out a low growl, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. In that moment, both of them knew Surviving the drones was only half the battle. The wastes had dangers of their own. The predator's growl rolled through the ravine, low and deep. Its shape was massive, hunched, with long claws scraping the stone as it moved forward. Its breath steamed in the cold night air. Carrying the scent of blood, the human stepped forward. Weapon ready, the alien girl moved beside him, her blade catching the faint glow of the fire. "Stay back," he warned. Her eyes stayed fixed on the creature. "If it charges, we both strike." The predator lowered its head, muscles tensing. Then it leapt. The human fired, the crack echoing in the night. The blast caught the beast's shoulder, spinning it mid-air. It landed hard but recovered fast. Its roar shaking the air, the girl darted in. Faster than her size suggested, her blade slashed across its leg, forcing it to stumble. The human fired again, this time hitting its chest. The creature collapsed with a final snarl, then lay still. They stood there, breathing hard, waiting to see if it would move again. It didn't. The girl looked at him, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. "You didn't tell me you could shoot like that," she said. "You didn't tell me you could move that fast." He replied. For a moment, the tension eased, but only for a moment. A sound reached them, faint, metallic, not the hum of drones, but something sharper. The human crouched and placed his ear to the ground. "They're coming," he said. "More drones?" She asked. "No," he said grimly. "Hunters." They quickly packed their gear, moving away from the fire before its smoke gave them away. The girl walked close to him, her small frame tense. "They're after me," she said quietly. "They've always been after you," he replied. She shook her head. "Not like this." He glanced at her. "What do you mean?" Her voice dropped lower. "There's a bounty," she said. "Placed by my own people." He stopped in his tracks. "Your own people?" She nodded, her expression hard. "They want me dead or captured. It doesn't matter which." The wind carried the scent of dust and metal between them. "Why?" he asked. Her eyes didn't meet his. "Because of my blood," she said. "I'm the last heir to a clan they betrayed, a name they want erased." He understood now. The constant chase, the lack of allies, the way she never trusted anyone. She wasn't just another soldier. She was a target to her enemies and a threat to her own kind. They reached the edge of the ravine and began moving across open ground again. In the distance, faint lights flickered, the glow of a settlement. "We can rest there," he said. She frowned. "Settlements mean people, and people mean questions." "Better questions than bullets," he replied. By the time they reached the outer edge of the settlement, the sky was starting to pale. It wasn't much, just a cluster of worn buildings around a central market. Merchants were setting up their stalls, the smell of cooking fires drifting through the air. The human kept his hood low, guiding the girl through the crowd. She kept her head down, her blade hidden but close. They entered a small, dim-lit trading post. The owner, an older alien with dull gray skin, looked them over. "Need a room?" he asked. The human nodded, sliding a few coins across the counter. The owner's eyes lingered on the girl for a moment too long before he handed over a key. Inside the small room, she sat by the window, peeking through the curtain at the street. Below, "You think he recognized me?" she asked. "Does it matter?" He replied, "Yes," she said sharply, "because bounty hunters don't need much to start following a trail." He was about to answer when a faint click sounded from the hallway. The human grabbed his weapon, motioning for her to stay still. The door handle turned slowly. In one motion, he yanked it open, catching a thin alien in dark clothes trying to push inside. The intruder froze, then bolted down the hall. The human gave chase, catching him at the stairwell. A quick struggle, and he had the stranger pinned against the wall. "Who sent you?" he demanded. The stranger's eyes darted toward the girl, who had followed to the door. "There's a price on her head," the stranger said. "More than you could ever dream of." The human's grip tightened. "Not interested," he growled, then shoved the stranger away, sending him stumbling down the stairs. Back in the room, the girl stared at him. "You're insane." She said, "Probably," he replied. "But I'm not selling you." Her gaze softened for a moment before she turned away. "You won't make much money that way," she muttered. "I'm not in this for money," he said, outside. The marketplace noise grew louder. Somewhere in the crowd, hunters were already blending in, and he knew, before long, the bounty on her head would make this settlement just as dangerous as the battlefield they'd left behind. The settlement looked busy from the window, but the human knew the noise outside was just a cover. Beneath the trading and chatter, danger was moving. Every person in the market could be a buyer, a seller, or a killer, and with the bounty on the alien girl's head, the line between them didn't matter. She sat near the corner of the room, her knees drawn up, eyes scanning every shadow. "They'll come soon," she said quietly. He checked his weapon, sliding fresh power cells into place. "They already have," he replied. The first sign came just after midday. A group of strangers entered the marketplace, their clothes mismatched, but their eyes all sharp, scanning. They split apart, disappearing into different alleys and stalls. Hunters. The human didn't wait for them to knock. "We're leaving," he said, grabbing his pack. She stood without question, strapping her blade to her side. They slipped out through the back of the building, keeping to narrow lanes between storage sheds. For a moment, the noise of the market faded behind them. Then, a sharp whistle cut through the air. It wasn't a call for trade. It was a signal. He pulled her into the shadow of a wall just as two hunters rounded the corner ahead. Their weapons were drawn. The human fired first, the blast catching one in the shoulder. The other dove behind a crate, returning fire that sent splinters flying. "Move!" he shouted. She sprinted past him, her small frame darting through the gap between buildings. He followed, covering their retreat with quick, precise shots. They burst into a wider street, and straight into another pair of hunters. The girl reacted instantly, her blade flashing as she ducked low, slicing across the leg of the nearest one. The second raised his weapon, but the human slammed into him before he could fire, knocking him into the dirt. They didn't stop running. The settlement was now a maze of moving enemies, every alley a trap. Hunters shouted to each other, their voices echoing through the narrow streets. "Block the east exit!" Someone yelled. "They're heading for the wall." Another called. The human pulled her into a narrow workshop, slamming the door shut behind them. Through a crack in the wooden wall, he could see more hunters circling outside. "They're trying to box us in," he muttered. The girl's breathing was fast, her amber eyes burning with defiance. "They want me alive," she said. "They'll try to capture, not kill. They'll kill me first," he replied, loading his last spare cell into the weapon. The door shook violently. A voice outside called, "Hand her over and walk away alive, human." He didn't answer. The second impact broke the latch, the door swinging inward. 3 hunters charged in. The human fired, dropping the first one instantly. The girl moved like lightning, leaping toward the second, her blade cutting deep into his arm. The third grabbed her from behind, yanking her off her feet. She kicked and twisted, but his grip was strong. The human didn't hesitate. He crossed the room in 2 steps, ramming his shoulder into the attacker and slamming him into the wall. The girl slipped free, landing hard but immediately scrambling to her feet. The fight was fast and brutal. By the time the last hunter hit the ground, both of them were breathing hard. More shouts came from outside. "They'll just keep coming," she said. He glanced at her. "Then we end it here." Her eyes widened. "That's suicide." He stepped to the window, checking the street. "Maybe," he said. "But if we keep running, they'll never stop." They made their stand in the open street. Hunters poured in from both ends, weapons raised. The human fired steadily, each shot precise, each movement deliberate. The girl stayed close to him, her blade a blur of silver in the fading light. Once, he saw a blast headed straight for her, and without thinking, he stepped in front of it. The impact slammed into his side, knocking him to one knee. She gasped, catching his arm to steady him. "You're hit," she said. "Keep fighting." He gritted out. Something changed in her then. Her strikes became sharper, more desperate, not for herself, but for him. She cut down 2 hunters in quick succession, forcing the rest to hesitate, fall back. One shouted. Within moments, the survivors were retreating, dragging their wounded with them. The street fell silent again, except for their ragged breathing. She knelt beside him, her hands shaking as they pressed against his wound. "You're bleeding too much," she said. He gave a faint, tired smile. "Better me than you." Her eyes locked on his, and for the first time, there was no distrust there, only fear. "You can't die," she whispered. "Not for me," I told. "You," he said, his voice low but steady. "I'm not leaving you." She helped him back to the workshop. Barricading the door, outside, the settlement was quiet again. But they both knew it wouldn't last. The bounty was still there, and now every hunter in this region would know exactly who they were. They had survived one battle, but the war for her life was far from over. The night air was cold inside the workshop. The human sat against the wall, his side still bleeding. The alien girl knelt beside him, pressing cloth against the wound. Her small hands trembled, but her gaze stayed fixed, refusing to look away. "You should rest," he said quietly. "If I rest, you'll die," she replied sharply. Her voice was thin, strained, as if holding back something more than fear. Outside, the settlement had gone quiet, but quiet in a place like this didn't mean safety. It meant someone was planning. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind against the walls made her glance toward the door. The human noticed. "You're still expecting them," he said. "They always come back," she murmured. "Until the target is gone." He shifted, pain pulling at his side. "You're not a target to me," he said. Her head snapped toward him. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. No one had ever said that to her. Hours passed, the fire they'd lit dying down to faint embers. She sat against the wall across from him, knees pulled up, watching him breathe. Her mind kept returning to the moment in the street, when he stepped in front of the blast without hesitation. She'd seen soldiers protect commanders before, but always for orders, for rank, for duty. He had done it for none of those things. Before dawn, movement came from outside, the faint shuffle of boots on stone. She was on her feet instantly, blade in hand. The human pushed himself up, though his face tightened with pain. "Stay behind." "Me," he said. She shook her head. "Not this time." The door burst open. 4 hunters stepped inside, weapons raised. The fight was fast and chaotic. The human fired at the first 2, forcing them back. The girl darted between the others, her blade striking with precision born of desperation. One hunter caught her arm, but she twisted away, slicing deep into his side. The last one charged at the human, weapon raised, but before he could strike, she was there, shoving the man back with all her strength. When the fight was over, the room smelled of smoke and metal. The hunters lay unmoving on the floor. The girl was breathing hard, her blade dripping. The human leaned against the wall, wiping blood from his mouth. "That was close," he said. "You're welcome," she replied, though her voice shook. They both knew this couldn't keep happening. Every day more hunters would come. As long as the bounty stood, neither of them could live freely. "What now?" she asked. "We end it," he said. "Not by running, by making them stop." They left the settlement before sunrise, moving toward the distant lights of the alien capital. The girl was silent most of the way, but her eyes stayed sharp. The human could feel her tension grow the closer they got. "This is where they'll kill us," she said quietly. "This is where we make sure they can't," he replied. The capital loomed ahead, towering spires of metal, glowing streets. Patrols at every corner. They moved through the shadows until they reached the great council building. Inside, the hall was filled with armed guards. At the center, the council sat, the ones who had put the bounty on her head. The girl stepped forward, her voice cutting through the chamber. "You wanted me gone," she said. "Now I'm here." The guards raised their weapons, but the human moved to stand in front of her. "You'll have to go through me first," he said, his voice carrying across the hall. Murmurs spread through the council. Surprise, confusion, fear. The girl's voice didn't waver. "You betrayed my clan, you killed my family, and you sent me to die. But you failed." She pointed to the human. "And you failed because of him," the council's leader sneered. "A human? That's what saved you." Her hand clenched around her blade. "No," she said. "A human who treated me like I was worth saving." The human stepped closer to her. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder, not to control, but to steady. She froze for a heartbeat. Then looked up at him. Her eyes softened in a way they never had before. She remembered the first time he touched her, in the ruins, when she shook not from fear, but from shock. No one had ever treated her like something precious until then. "You're shaking again," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "It's not fear this time." "No," she whispered. "It's because you still don't let go." By the end of that day, the bounty was withdrawn. The council had been exposed before their own people. The human and the tiny warrior walked out of the capital together. She no longer kept distance between them. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, she knew one thing: she was no longer a target. She was someone worth protecting, and she had found the one person in the galaxy who would never stop.